Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the first of our parent information series, Talk with the Experts. I'm Michelle Probozanski, Superintendent of Education with Lakehead District School Board. This presentation is being brought to you on behalf of SEAC, the Special Education Advisory Committee. We're so excited to be able to do this and offer these amazing speakers for the next 3 Wednesdays. Our speaker this evening is Dr. Todd Cunningham, who is a clinical and school psychologist, assistant professor, chair of the School and Clinical Child Psychology Program at the University of Toronto. He provides psychological services through his private practice as well. His research investigates the support of students with learning difficulties. Some of his projects involve looking at new techniques in psychological assessments, evaluation of assistive technology, professional development in literacy and numeracy, and telepsychology. We are so very excited to have Dr. Cunningham with us this evening to speak to us about learning disabilities and supporting your child with a learning disability. Where we are streaming on live.lakeheadschools.ca, you will see that there's an email address, seaclive@lakeheadschools.ca. If you have any questions that you would like Dr. Cunningham to address after his presentation, please email those questions to that email address, and we will have Ms. Lori Carson address those after the presentation and have a little moderation of a Q&A. So welcome, Dr. Cunningham. We so look forward to your presentation, and please take it away.
Thank you very much for having me. And good evening to everybody in their homes. I hope we are staying safe. So tonight I really want to talk about something that's very dear to me, and that's the area of learning disabilities, and really talking about all of the great information that we have these days about what is a learning disability, how we can identify, and things that we can be doing to support our children at home, even during the time of online learning. Now, one of the reasons that this is such a dear and passionate topic of mine is that I have my own learning disability. It was originally called an auditory sequential working memory disorder. And it took me to my second year of my master's degree to figure out what that all meant. But it's also known as dyslexia, or today kind of a learning disability in the area of reading and writing. And what this really has meant for me over the years is that, well, the first thing is, anytime I go about writing, I don't write in regular writing, I write in Toddish. I misspell about 68% of all the words that I write. And Microsoft Word or Google Docs loves to underline my words in red. So when I wrote my dissertation, which was about 450 pages long, and 68% of the words were underlined in red, well, let me tell you, editing took on a whole new meaning in life. Now, Toddish has gotten me into some difficulties over the years. The first place it got me into some difficulties is in the areas of academics in school. See, when I graduated high school, I wanted to become a teacher. And so I went off to Trent University and I enrolled in the concurrent education program at Trent. Now, my first year at Trent, I got this wonderful opportunity to teach in a grade 1 class. And after teaching in that grade 1 class, I had to write up for my teacher what it was like to teach grade 1. So I wrote this wonderful reflection paper, handed it into my teacher, and got it back a couple weeks later. Now, on the first page of that paper, I was talking about tutoring a group of students. But what I actually wrote was torturing a group of studs. The comment on my paper is, "What are you doing in the classroom?" Yeah, Todd is my own language, got me into some academic challenges. Socially, it's also been some challenging too. See, my dad, he has his master's in special education. And ever since I was a little guy, he'd wake up with me and spend kind of 45 minutes every single morning trying to teach me how to spell. And somewhere around grade 3, my dad really started pulling out his hair saying, Todd, you have to listen to me. You have to listen to me. Because there's some words in the English language, you have to memorize how to spell those words. You can't sound out every word. You have to memorize how to spell these words. Now, one of these words was the word beautiful. Well, being a male and being in grade 3, when was I ever going to use such a ridiculous word as the word beautiful? So I didn't listen to my old man. Well, first year university came around again, and I met this woman. And so I started to use this new technology. It was called email, and we were emailing back and forth with each other. And I wanted to tell her that she was really beautiful. And what I end up writing is, "You are really buttful." Well, let's say that got a pretty fast response. So I decided to pick up the phone and use a strength instead of my weakness. So for me, my learning disability, the first year that I see this is in the area of writing, especially in the area of spelling. Now, in the second area, I'm going to ask you to kind of play along with me at home. I'm going to put some text up on the screen, and I want you to read this text out loud. Be brave and read it out loud. Here we go. Oh, sorry, it might be hard for you to see. Let me make it a little bit bigger for you. There you go. Now, this is not what the text looks like. However, if you were trying to read this out loud to yourself, then that's probably how I sound. Because for me, I don't see words on a page. I see a whole bunch of letters. And those letters, they have to be translated into sounds. Those sounds have to be blended together to get words. And I have to hold each of those meanings of each of those words in my head as I go and figure out the next word. And what happens is so much energy goes into trying to figure out what each and every single word is, that by the time I get to the end of a paragraph, I don't have a clue what I've just read. And so I have to go back and reread the same paragraph over and over and over again, trying to understand what is the meaning within the paragraph. So for me, my learning disability, not only does it impact the area of spelling and trying to get my ideas down, but it also impacts the area of reading. In high school, the strategy that I learned was I had to reread a paragraph over and over and over again until I could write one thing down on a piece of paper. And when I could write one thing down on a piece of paper, that was the signal to me that I understood something within that paragraph. And therefore I could move on to the next paragraph. And so I would sit there and read, write, write. Through most of high school, I would come home about 4 o'clock each night and spend till almost midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning trying to get through the day-to-day readings. Now, I wouldn't have been able to get to even to high school if it wasn't for my parents, who would often go in and advocate for me. Because often my teachers were confused about me. Hey, here's this guy, when you talk to him, he seems to be can talk well. He seems to have some good ideas. When I look at him, he seems to be okay. But boy, when I go to try and read what he's written on a piece of paper, I don't have a clue what he's written. And so often I was called, he's just being lazy. He's not trying hard enough. In fact, in grade 7, I was placed in a self-contained classroom, a small classroom with 8 students, 2 teachers. And the idea in the self-contained classroom was that they would really teach me how to read that year and spell. However, what I did learn that year was that when I was really kind of frustrated and not wanting to do my work, my teacher sat down with me and said, Todd, if you never learn how to read or write, what do you expect to do with your life? What do you expect to do? Now, for me, this is a huge blow, because at that moment, as I was thinking, I was like, wow, like my dad and I have been working since grade 1 for trying to teach me how to read and write. Here, I special room all year trying to teach me how to read and write, but yet I still don't know how to read and write. And so the question that starts going through my mind is, why am I here? Why do I continue to do this? Luckily, in grade 9, I had the most amazing special education teacher, or resource teacher, Miss Turton. And Miss Turton was the first teacher who ever sat down with me and said, Todd, you have this thing called a learning disability. Do you know what it means? And I'm like, yeah, I know what it means. It means I'm stupid. I can't read, I can't write, and I seem to fail all my tests. I think that's kind of the definition of stupidity. It's like, no. It actually means the actually opposite. You're actually a really smart guy, but you have some weaknesses. And she was the first person who got out that old psychoeducational assessment that was done in grade 3 and kind of dusted it off for the first time, and actually went through and translated that psychoese into English so I could begin to understand what my learning disability was about. And she was the first person in schools that began to really advocate for me, who began to be my champion and began to say, hey, let's problem solve this together. I don't know exactly what the right answer is or the right way to do it, but let's problem solve. Let me go and talk to your teachers about this. And she began to be the person who really allowed me to understand what my strengths were so that I could begin to pursue a different path instead of dropping out of school to continue on in school and do another 20 somewhat years of schooling to get to where I am today. So let's pause for a second here. And I want you to ask yourself, how do you define learning disability? What is your definition? See, over the years, there has been many different definitions that have come about. And what's really neat is that through our understanding, we have really developed a deep understanding of what actually causes the learning disability. What is the underlying component that really is a learning disability? In the last major review of the literature that was done in the development of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual by the Neurodevelopmental Group at the American Psychological Association, or American Psychiatric Association, what they did is they kind of came up with, based on all the research to date in the field, they stated that a learning disability is the presence and unexpected difficulty learning the association between spoken and written symbols that are required for reading, writing, and arithmetic. These culturally derived associations are often arbitrary, do not constitute natural developmental milestones, such as walking and talking, and so must be taught explicitly. Now, I love this definition because it actually gets down to what this actual specific weakness is. The specific weakness is actually the association between language we have, the spoken, and the symbol representation. When I go to read, I see these symbols, and my brain does not translate that into the auditory, the spoken word, very quickly. And in fact, we have now imaging, neural imaging, to actually show the highway of this kind of up here, this component that doesn't connect very well. And because that component does not connect very well, because we have this, literally this cognitive weakness that sits here, it makes it hard for me to learn how to read, to be able to write. And also it means I'm going to have difficulties with math, the basic parts of math. Because you know what? 5 times 5 equals 25 uses the same neural connection as DOG equals dog. It all is about language to symbolic connections that are making it hard. So it's a very specific weakness. However, that specific weakness begins to have a cascade effect. So I'm going to ask you something else now. What is this? No, it's not a horse. It's a frog. Okay, what's this? Yeah, it's a watch. And what property does it have? You're right, it tells the time. What about now? Yeah, it's a watch and it tells the time. And now? You're right, still a watch. No matter how we turn this around in space, a watch is a watch is a watch. Our brains have something called feature detectors in the back part here. And what they do from a very early age is they learn that an object is an object no matter how I rotate this in space. My phone doesn't go from a phone to a cup of coffee to a car based on its orientation. Our brains learn from a very early age how to recognize objects and understand that even as the object rotates, its features and its properties stay the same. Until we get to this. What's this? Yeah. And what property does it have? All right, the puss sound. And what about this stick and ball? Right, it makes the duh sound. And the properties of this stick and ball? Yep, it has the bus sound. And this stick and ball? Yep, it has the quiss sound. So suddenly, when I enter into school, this object, this shape, this symbol no longer follows the basic neural wiring that's in my brain. Suddenly, these things, these stick and balls, these shapes, means that my brain has to start to rewire itself in a different way, that it no longer can continue on with the original wiring that's built into our brains, but has to lay on a whole new set of wiring. It has to start to regroup this language elements, parts of language, to these symbolic shapes, to these shapes that we're doing, and having to start to wire it together. And this is the beginning aspect of where the weakness begins to go. Now, having a difficulty in reading doesn't mean actually all of reading is impaired, because actually, for me, for all of us, reading is actually a very complicated set of skills. We have our language skills that we have to develop. I have to know the vocabulary of my language. If I read the word dog and I don't know what dog is, then I'm not going to know what the dog is. So I have to develop my vocabulary. I have to have my general oral language abilities, my ability to understand. Most kids we see who have learning disabilities, they do very well orally. They can talk and understand in conversation. They love when their parents read out loud to them because their oral language skills are developing very nicely, along with their vocabulary parts. But the weakness, that weakness between sound to symbol, it's down here right at the beginning. It's the difference between knowing the sounds of English or the sounds of any language and how they get connected to the symbolic representation. And this is where the weakness is. It is the connection between sound and symbol. And what happens is, this is a pyramid, and each of these builds on itself. If I don't develop my letter to sound associations and develop phonics, which is the rules of how to blend those letters together to get words. If I can't do that, then I can't begin to read quickly and accurately at a fast pace. And if I can't read quickly and accurately, then I don't actually have the cognitive resources for understanding. This is why when in high school, I had to reread the same paragraph over and over and over again to allow me to finally understand. So the weakness down here creates a cascading effect of weaknesses that go up that leads to a student not knowing how to read. The other thing that we now know through neuroimaging is that when this weakness is there, when there's a weakness here, and we start trying to push the student up, it causes a lot of stress on the brain. The brain undergoes a lot of stress. And stress is just a measurement of how much energy our bodies are doing. And so anytime we do something really hard, that creates stress on the brain. And over the years, what we have learned is when a brain is under stress during a learning disability, there's a bunch of developmental kind of stages that the student with a learning disability goes through that takes a simple weakness of a difficulty of associating symbols to sounds and starts to manifest into kind of more of the bigger issues that we see about difficulties with our self-concept, our engagement in school, our willingness to do work independent, or feeling we can do work independently, and often the feeling of wanting to quit school earlier. And those stages are called the Matthew effect, leading to issues with engagement, running into issues of the performance gap, and then finally academic self-concept. So let's start with the Matthew effect. So the Matthew effect states, it's come from the books of Matthew, states the richer get richer, the poor get poorer. Those who are rich in reading, those who are able to read, guess what they like to do when they go home at the end of the day? They read. My 9-year-old daughter, anytime she gets a moment, she is in a book. She is constantly reading. She is reading and reading and reading. And because she's reading and reading and reading, she's practiced reading, and she's getting better and better and better at reading. Her abilities keep building and building on herself because she's able to read, and she can so she likes to read, so she practices it by doing it over and over again. Well, at her age, when I was 9, you know what I did for fun? I went outside and played. I was out running around, building with Lego. I was doing fun things. I wasn't reading. So though I had a reading weakness, though my abilities developed over time, I didn't actually get the same amount of time on task, same amount of practice, because I wasn't reading for the fun of it. I was avoiding reading at all costs. And so though over time, my reading abilities continue to increase, though in comparison to where my peers were, or students who are able to read, that gap kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And in our education system, in our current curriculum, we have a critical age, grade 3 to grade 4. Because up to grade 3, really, the curriculum is about trying to teach students how to read. From grade 4 onward, you really need to know how to read to continue to learn. So up to grade 3, we're really learning how to read. And then from grade 4 onward, you really need to know how to read to continue to learn. So there's a fundamental shift within our curriculum. And so as I go into grade 4 and grade 5, suddenly those abilities that haven't developed yet, I need them to be able to engage in the work that others are doing. And this is where I run into the engagement issue. Now, I'm a psychologist, and I get to meet wonderful families and students every single day. And often what I hear from a lot of parents is that my child is unmotivated. My child who has a learning disability is very unmotivated. Now, that's not always the case. See, motivation is about intent. And I find that a lot of students I work with, especially in the early age, are highly motivated. They want to be like their peers. They really, really want to be like their peers. However, we run into what we see as the engagement issue. And an engagement is the actual action of doing something. Can they engage in the work? And engagement is made up of 3 variables. One, cognitively, can they do it? Now, students who have reading disability, there is a cognitive weakness that's making it hard for them to be able to decode the word. So there is a weakness there. The second thing is behaviorally. Can I regulate myself to be able to sit there and do my work? This is where our students who have like ADHD, who have a hard time with attention, sustained attention, this is where they have difficulties within engagement. They go to sit down and then they get back up again, or they're looking somewhere else, or they're thinking about something else, or they're just walking around all over the place. Behaviorally, I have to be able to regulate myself to sit down. The third thing is emotionally. Do I enjoy what I'm doing, or do I find what I'm doing kind of provokes anxiety or stress within me? Now, for students who have learning disabilities, what happens is that in the engagement area, we run into kind of 2 issues. One, there's the cognitive weakness that makes it hard. So as I sit there to do the work, what happens is the work that I'm doing is actually too hard for me. And so that begins to create a lot of stress. When I was in grade 4, I was part of what was known as the whole language period, where we would be given level readers and we'd have to read out loud to the class. And I remember sitting in a semicircle in my class, and we'd all were given the reader for the day. And we were all expected to read 1 paragraph out loud. And I remember sitting there looking around going, oh my goodness, how am I going to sound like everybody else? I didn't want to look stupid in front of everybody. I didn't want to have that embarrassment or shame brought upon myself. I wanted to look like I could read like everybody else. And so I developed my first reading strategy. I counted how many people until it was my turn to read. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10. Okay, I'm the 10th person. Count down 10 paragraphs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, that's my paragraph. And so I began to rehearse it and rehearse it and rehearse it. So when it came time for me to read out loud, I could sound like everybody else. But you know what happened almost every single time when it came time for me to read? The person beside me would start to read my paragraph. I miscount it. And so as that person begins to read my paragraph, I look down at the next paragraph on the page, and I try to start practicing it. Of course, at this point, emotionally, I am feeling very anxious. My stress levels are so high. And what we know through the neural research at this point is when our stress levels get too high, when we start to having those anxiety symptoms, our brains start to change themselves. They go into a fight or flight mode. And when our brains go into a fight or flight mode, it actually shuts down our ability to actually concentrate. We have a hard time to actually focus on what we're doing. Our hearts begin to race very quickly as we are preparing for to either flee the situation or fight what's coming. I get the sweaty palms as the adrenaline starts pouring through my system, and I'm sitting here trying to concentrate. Of course, now the person beside me is done reading. Everybody in the class is staring at me, and my teacher's like, Todd. So I tried to read the first word, which is probably the word there, but I read it as the word the, and everybody begins to laugh. So again, what happens is the question starts going through my mind. Why am I doing this to myself? Why am I putting myself through this situation? Over the years, I have met some much more brilliant individuals who have taught me what I probably should have done in those situations. They have taught me strategies that they have learned in how to get out of very stressful or anxiety-provoking situations. They don't sit there and just let everybody laugh. They do some preemptive strategies. You know, if they know that something's hard's going to happen, what do? They act up. Better yet, they might even bop someone, because that gets them sent out into the hallway or even down to the principal's office. Suddenly, I go from being in a very stressful, anxiety-provoking situation to almost being relieved from that as I walk out of the classroom or go down to the principal's. In fact, sometimes we actually reinforce the misbehaviors that we are wanting to control for, because the misbehaviors are actually a way of escaping from a situation that the brain is perceiving to be too stressful, that's causing too much anxiety. On the other case, we can also lose engagement by having boredom, again, in this area of emotions. I remember in grade 7, the key things that, well, my reading was kind of down at the grade 2 level. And so the readers I was using was reading about Bob chasing the ball, and Jill petting the cat. The word petting was probably not in there. That's would be too complicated of a word. But anyhow, the reading was what we called, the curriculum was so watered down. It was watered down to my basic reading abilities that I found it very, very boring. So no wonder that by the end of grade 7, I'm thinking, why am I doing this to myself? I feel very anxious when I'm being singled out or trying to be doing work that I find too hard, or they're giving me work that's way too easy for me and just super boring. Now, we can simulate this. We can actually simulate this exact situation within about 30 seconds for any of us. If you have a piece of paper around, I ask you to just grab that piece of paper. It doesn't have to be any big, large piece of paper. You just need a piece of paper. And I want you to just draw a line in the middle of that piece of paper for me. Okay? Give you a second to get this set up. When I say go in a couple seconds, what I would like you to do is I would like you to write down the top, what is the definition of an exceptional student? So I want you to give me the definition of an exceptional student. I'll give you 30 seconds to do that. Here we go. On your mark, get set, go. Ten more seconds. And stop. Okay. This time, we're going to write another definition. We're going to do what is the definition of special education. But this time, I want you to use your non-dominant hand, and you can't write down any words with the letter N in it. Again, you're going to have 30 seconds to give me the best definition of special education, but you have to use your non-dominant hand, and you can't use any words with the letter N in it. Here we go. On your mark, get set, go. $15 seconds left. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and stop. Now, how was that for you? Now, when I do this simulation I've done it for like 500 pediatricians or thousands of educators, or do it in my classes all the time, what I often get is people talk about how quickly they talk about frustration, how they felt very stressed. Their hands begin to hurt really quickly on them when they're doing the second. That many of them said they just gave up. They didn't care about it. When the task is too difficult, when the task is too difficult, then it creates a sense of stress, of anxiety, of frustration, and we disengage from the task. For students with learning disabilities, that disengagement, it's not that they're not motivated to do the work. Students want to do the same thing that their peers are doing. However, often we have not provided them the proper support, or we have not done the right type of teaching to build up their skills so that they're able to engage in the work that they're doing right now. In this new online environment, we're seeing a lot of this happening, not just with our learning disability students, with a lot of students, as they now try to have to navigate both learning how to use the new online resources, Google Docs, Google Classrooms, Microsoft Teams, all these new different platforms that they're having to learn, and they're trying to do the work at the same time. When the load is too high on the brain, it creates a lot of anxiety. And often what we find with the online learning, and we were doing some studies in my lab before this all happened, is we actually have to teach the platforms first, get the students really comfortable on the platforms before we introduce the curriculum back. Because if we're trying to do both of them simultaneously, often neither of them are learned very well. And if we have students who are running into that engagement issue for too long, then we run into what the performance gap is. Now, the performance gap basically states that each year a typical student learns one level of curriculum year after year. So they have a kind of a continuous development of curriculum knowledge. However, for students who have learning disabilities, because of their weakness in their skills, or because they're being pulled out of class to be able to work on stuff, or they don't have the skills to actually learn the new material, that each year they're not developing a full level of the curriculum. In fact, they're kind of losing bits of the curriculum over and over and over and over time. So usually about around grade 5, grade 6, again, we have this what we call a big performance gap, where these students are performing and where they need to perform there's a huge difference there. And we really see this when we work with especially grade 6 females who have a lot of spelling difficulties. From grade 1 to grade 3, because spelling has been an area of weakness for them, they struggle to get any writing out. They haven't actually practiced writing that much. They just worried about on their spelling. They come to our clinic. We show them a new piece of technology called word prediction software that corrects within 15 minutes. They can know how to spell, the software spelling for them. However, just because they're able to spell doesn't mean they can write out nice sentences or paragraphs, because for the last 6 years, when everybody else was learning how to write sentences and paragraph, they were just stuck on learning how to spell. And so we have to go back and reteach how to write sentences, paragraphs, and do the grammar. Just because we can correct the underlying issue doesn't mean that all the other skills that one would acquire over those years automatically turn on. And that's one of the challenges that we have with learning disabilities, is because of this basic weakness, there's a cumulative deficit that often develops over time that leads into bigger and bigger problems. So we're constantly having to say, okay, if we're fixing this issue, what other things do we have to teach to get that student back up to par? We have no magical cures at this point where we can just flick a switch one night or give a student a piece of technology and suddenly they're going to perform at the same level that their peers are able to perform at. There's still learning that has to come on to fix this performance gap. But because of the difficulties that this little weakness has caused, and because that has led to the mathing effect, because they're not practicing and developing that skill as much, and because they don't have that skill, that academic skill developed as well, it runs into issues of being able to engage in the work. Because they can't engage in the work, that they're falling further and further behind. This leads to probably the biggest part of the deficit or the disability, which is academic self-concept. Now, our academic self-concept is, how do I view myself as a learner? And if I have very high academic self-concept, I think I'm a great student. I love school. I want to do this. But if I have very low academic self-concept, then I think I'm an awful student. I don't want to do the work. What we know with students who have learning disabilities, and compared to same age peers, is that 89% of LDs, and compared to their peers, indicate that they have very low academic self-concept. When they compare themselves to the students around them, they know that they're not doing very well. And unfortunately, when it comes to prediction of how well a person is going to do in life in terms of going on to graduate school, it's academic self-concept that predicts this. What we typically see is around grade 3, students' academic self-concept who have learning disability really goes down low. It really starts to hit a very low in grade 6, 7. And if it stays very low in grade 6 and 7, then often this leads them to not to apply to taking more of the university track courses, but taking more applied or to work level courses. So we actually, at this point, at a critical time, they actually decide to go down a different learning journey than they could have possibly gone down. If they continue on with very low academic self-concept, then they're more likely to leave school at an earlier rate than their peers, and less likely to go on to college or university. So academic self-concept, if there's any part of the learning disability that's the most impairing thing, it's this. And unfortunately, when you get to, I find that when students in grade 9, grade 10 have very low academic self-concept, that motivation does change. They are now no longer motivated to continue to work. And so it's really, we have to spend a lot of time with these individuals to help to rebuild this academic self-concept so they're willing to re-engage in the work. Luckily, we know what to do. We know how we can begin to help these students. And there's stuff that you can start doing today at home with your child. When it comes to helping students, there's two main things. There's remediation, which is strengthening the underlying skills, building up those natural skills, and then there's compensatory, which is circumventing those areas of weaknesses. When it comes to remediation, what we know, again, there's a ton of literature that tells us what to do. But for early on, the key thing that we need to do is we need to do what we call direct instruction. We need to teach the students the letter sound associations. For example, please just read this word out loud to me. Oh, you don't know how to read this word? Sorry, I forgot to teach you what these symbols are. Here we go. Repeat after me. Your turn. Excellent. Here's the next one. E. Your turn. E. Excellent. My turn. Ch. Your turn. Ch. Okay. We're gonna make it a little bit harder. We're blending together. Here we go. Whoops. E. Excellent. E. Very good. Let's do this one. Each. Yes. Each. Excellent. Now let's put it together and say it the fast way. Teach. Teach. You got it. Teach. What we know is we have to teach the letter sound associations, especially down in grade 1 to our students. This is where we begin to it. There's a ton, this is just to say, there's a ton of research to say that this is the essential skill that we have to start on. Students need to know the sounds, and they need to know how the sounds relate to the letters, and start there and learn how to blend phonics. There's this wonderful resource you can get. It's like $40, $50 online. It's Teach Your Child to Read in 100 Easy Lessons. And it goes through the systematic approach to be able to teach students the letter sound associations and how to blend. It gets the beginning of that reading triangle This tackles the beginning of the reading triangle. It doesn't teach the whole reading triangle, but it gets the beginning of the reading triangle. Another great resource for parents is at Reading Rockets. So if you Google Reading Rockets parent engagement, you're going to get a wonderful web page that tells you great things that you can begin to do with your students today at home at different levels. Now, most of this stuff is for kids kind of grade or kindergarten to about grade 4 to really help them on, though it can be used in other areas. But this is the primary thing, what we're going to do with these young children is we want to do the remediation. When we get to older students, we might not be able to do the remediation, so we need to do other things, which is called our compensatory. And compensatory is circumventing those areas of weaknesses. One of the areas of circumvention is the area of assistive technology. Now, assistive technology is any technology that allows me to maintain or increase my level of performance when, by using a piece of technology if I have an area of disability. If I was paraplegic and I could not walk, then before the wheelchair was invented, I had to pull myself across the ground, or I had to have someone carry me from point A to point B to be able to get across. Now, once the wheelchair was invented, suddenly I can get myself independently and much more efficiently from point A to point B. That's the same thing when it comes to assistive technology for students with learning disabilities. What it does is it allows them to be able to do their work much more independently. At AT Select, which is my website that we put together, it has a review of all the different assistive technology tools out there to be able to help students who have learning disabilities. It breaks it down into the different categories of reading, writing, math, organization, so that the parents can help to be able to identify, or teachers can help identify which is the kind of the area of weakness and what are the best tools to be able to help those students out. For me, one of the key pieces of technology I use on a day-to-day basis is called text-to-speech software. That's where the computer reads out loud to me. And in fact, the program that I use all the time is called Natural Reader. It's a free text-to-speech program that allows me to highlight any text on my Windows or Mac-based computer and have it read out to me. Some of you who might be in Google Classrooms might be using Read and Write, which is another program that allows us to be able to read the text out loud. But we have tools out there that are going to be able to help us be able to engage in the process. So in many cases, it's actually a very exciting time to be alive when it comes to the area of learning disabilities, because in fact, for the first time, we actually know how to teach reading in a way so that we can actually remediate. We have the fundamental knowledge of how to be able to teach students how to read through a mixture of direct instruction and strategic instructions. We have technology to help students to be able to work around those areas of weaknesses. Plus, we know the other strategies we have to teach along with the technology to be able to make it effective. In the end, the reason why this is really important, why this matters to start working with kids now, is that we really want to ensure that we allow them to begin to engage and feel better. Several years ago, I had a client who came in. He was a 64-year-old man, and he dropped out of school when he was in grade 7 and never learned how to read and write. He was worked in a bakery for many years, but due to a physical injury or work-related injury, he had to stop. Now, I sat down with him one day and I taught him how to use a program called word prediction, which guesses at which words you're trying to write. It's kind of like the autocorrect on your phone, but much more sophisticated. It took me about 5 minutes to show him how to use this program, and then I left him alone. I came back 15 minutes later and he had tears in his eyes. He had written this love and apology letter to his girlfriend. And he said, "This is the first thing I have ever written in my life by myself." From that day forth, he went home. We got him set up on the technology. We taught him the strategies on how to use the technology. And he was able to read his mail, write things. And suddenly he got himself off of disability. He started volunteering in the community. He began to really contribute back to other students. He started volunteering in a library to help other kids who had reading difficulties learn how to use this technology. What broke my heart is that it wasn't until he was 64 years of age that he began to engage with literacy. My hope is, as we work with our kids now, is that we continue to look for those tools, for those teachers, for those strategies, for those ways of helping our child to begin to engage in this area of reading, writing, and mathematics, so they're not having to wait till when they're 64 years of old to be able to develop these skills. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Cunningham. That was wonderful. I do have a couple of questions if you have a few minutes.
Yes, I definitely do.
Wonderful. One of the questions that came in from a family member is one that probably a number of people are thinking about right now. The question said, I have a child who has anxiety and depression, and of course her anxieties are elevating as the COVID numbers rise. Yes. To protect my child, should I pull her out of school until the pandemic is over?
And that's a very challenging one. It's really kind of case by case. The bigger thing is to really start to sit back and listen to our kids as they talk about what are their fears, what are their worries as those numbers are going up. And often we have to start with ourselves and look at ourselves as parents and how are we reacting to that. Our kids, ever since they're little, babies, they turn to us to gauge the level of worry that they should have. We call it stranger danger in the first years of life. A mother's holding their child, a stranger's walking up. The child looks at the mother or father to see, is a stranger a threat or not? Should I be worried or not? They continue to do that to this day. If we ourselves are talking and worried about this and feeling very anxious about what's going on, then they're going to read that this is not a safe time. We don't feel safe right now. As a family, we're not feeling safe. So it is harder for them to be able to sit in class and engage within the online learning. So first we have to check ourselves. How are we portraying and are we doing it? Do we need to help to kind of model talking about safety, coming up with a safe plan, talking through about what our worries are and how we are working as a family and with the school to keep ourselves safe and make sure those safety plans are in place. So we need to do that first. If we continue to, and the other thing we need to do is we also need to find time to relax, turning off the TV, not continuing to look at those numbers. Actually doing some meditation is really important to help just give our brain a calm, collective place. And if we continue to still feel worried about going to school, and if it's financially feasible, because I know some people have to be at work, it's not always an option. But if it is, then maybe it is time to take a bit of a break. But the key thing here is that we need to know how to talk and listen. We need to validate their feelings, and then we need to work together to come up with a safety plan. Because even if they're sitting at home, it's not probably going to reduce their anxiety around feeling stressed.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I have a related question, and then there's another question about some of your slides. Dr. Cunningham, do you have any advice, then, particular ways that a parent might support their child who has a learning disabilities while they're stressed and working online?
Yeah, the first thing is if they're stressed, if they're really stressed, you're not going to be able to work online. You're not going to work in school. What we know, again, is when stress levels get too high, the frontal lobe actually shuts off. So no learning is taking. We always say we have to create a safe environment for learning to take place. And so the first thing is we have to do is understand where that stress is coming from. Is that stress due to the fact that they're having to learn a new platform? I know I saw that with both of my daughters as they started online in September, trying to learn these new platforms. Their stress levels were high. There wasn't a lot of actual learning going on for the first bit until we kind of got that piece taught. The second thing we have to do is what is the general level of anxiety within our household? Kind of going back to the first question, are we all stressed out and none of us are able to attend very well? So we have to deal with that stressor that's in place. And then the third thing is what are the other, what we call barriers to accessing it? Is it that they need a screen reader, they need the text-to-speech to read out loud, or they don't have enough typing yet? This is a huge one. A lot of kids who jumped online, the expectation is they're going to suddenly all know how to type at 32 words a minute, which is the minimum speed you have to be able to get your ideas down on a computer. The vast majority of kids can't do that. They're all hunting and pecking. Do we need to take some time to start to practice that skill so that we can reduce the stress levels of typing to be able to get them engaged? So what we have to do is kind of watch our children or youth online, talk to them. What are they finding to be challenging? What are the things that they're finding hard? And then systematically start to tackle each of those problems one at a time. There is not a one way to say, do this and it's all going to be good. It's actually a whole bunch of things that have to happen to be able to get a child to feel competent and working online. Now, I'm a child psychologist. I study education learning. I have a lab of 20 amazing students who we study this all the time. It took my child 6 weeks before they were really well on their way to learning. And that's with me pulling on all the knowledge and skills of lots of people to be able to get that to happen. It takes time. It doesn't happen overnight.
Thank you. Another question we have from one of our parents is they're wondering if it's possible to have a learning disability in an area outside of literacy. She says that her son is 3 grades below in math, but he's at grade level in reading and writing.
Very much so. So we do have, so learning disabilities can impact in the area of reading, writing, or mathematics. And we do have, it's a smaller number of students who have a very specific learning disability just in the area of mathematics. Now, the mathematics learning disabilities get a little bit more complicated. It's not the nice simple language to symbolic association. That can cause difficulties. We often see the kids have difficulties with kind of learning how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide. Now we have another group of students who have more of a difficulty with what we call subitization, or understanding just the magnitude of numbers. They really don't understand numbers. They don't understand that 6 is twice as big as 3. They can kind of learn that, but they just don't understand that. They don't understand time or money. They just really don't understand the fundamentals of what math is all about. The other group we have is more of our kids who have kind of more of an executive functioning challenge. And we see this as more the careless error kid. You know, they're doing the math. They kind of know how to do the math, but every time they go to do the math test, they make a careless error. They forget to borrow, or they forget to add, or they subtract instead of adding. They do always careless errors all the time that bring down their math marks. And so those are kids we see more with the executive functioning difficulties. So yes, we do have kids who have very specific math-related disabilities, and there's usually 3 primary, there's a 4th one, visual spatial. They don't understand geometry. So there's 4 main reasons why they go. The same reason that kids have difficulties reading and spelling, the magnitude, the executive functioning, or the visual spatial.
Thank you. Another question from a parent. They're asking, what were you referring to on one of the slides where you listed peer tutors as a compensatory solution?
Oh, peer tutors. So there's a lot of research out there that shows that there's in 2 areas. Kids who have like ADHD and that, a peer tutor can be a person who just says, hey, we're on this question right now. Back when we were allowed to sit next to each other, they'd be able to say, you know, Johnny, we're doing this question right now. Just quickly pulling their attention back to what they're doing. And the students, they can see their attention's wandering, they just pull it back, or together they collaborate on a worksheet together. For kids who have reading disability, a peer tutor could simply just be the person who reads out loud the questions or the text to them, and they again co-create the worksheet together. Or there's the more formalized program called PALS, Peer Assistive Learning Program, that actually goes through and works with, teaches a group of students skills, and they practice those skills together, so it improves their reading comprehension or their writing performances.
Wonderful. Thank you. Another question. Do you have any suggestions on ways that I, as a parent, can help improve my child's academic self-concept?
Yeah, so the big thing that we know in terms of improving academic self-concept, first is help ensuring that they understand their learning profile and their learning challenges. Now, sometimes this is actually hard for parents to do because kids kind of develop this attitude like, of course, mom and dad tell me I'm great and things are, it's not my fault and blah, blah, blah. So sometimes it does take an outside professional to kind of help start this conversation around their profile because they've always heard mom and dad or my guardians say, it's not you, you have a learning disability and trying to explain it. But so sometimes it can't always come from the parent in this conversation. But the first key thing is understanding. They have to understand what their learning profile is and come to begin to accept what it is. The second thing they have to do is once they understand where those kind of specific challenges is start to understand why the accommodations that I'm using, having the computer read out loud, or why do I have to go and spend 45 minutes each day learning how to read is so vital so that I can be able to begin to build on my strengths. And that's another key thing in terms of understanding the learning profile, that there's always strengths there. I always say parents need bragging rights. You need bragging rights. You need to find those essence of your child that you can go and tell other parents about. Growing up, I loved singing and playing the trumpet. So the bragging rights were my parents talked about my music abilities. So that they had something to talk about. That's really important. It's really important for your child to hear you talking to others about, what those strengths that you see in them, bragging about them. That's really, really important. So we have to understand their profile. They have to understand why the accommodations they're doing is working very well. We have to begin to brag about their strengths. And the third thing is, and this has to be in collaboration with their teacher, is we have to ensure success happens. One of the biggest things that happens with kids with learning disabilities is they put forth a lot of effort. They study for a test, spelling test. They go in to write the spelling test after spending a whole week studying for it, and they fail the test. The amount of effort I put forth did not result in the type of gains that I would expect, or the results I would expect. And if I had that too much, then suddenly I go, why try? So if they put forth a good effort, we need to ensure that the right accommodations are in place so that then they get the right type of reward, that they can see that their effort does translate into success for themselves. For me in high school, in grade 9, a lot of that was doing oral tests at first. Ms. Turton advocated for me to do oral tests. So she taught me how to study, and then I do the test orally. And so suddenly I was getting A's for the first time. I was like, wow, this is amazing. Or she would scribe. The teacher didn't want to do it, so I'd come down to her office. She would read me the questions, and then she would scribe my answers on the page. So again, the teachers could see or understand what level of learning I was having. They were no longer measuring my reading or bad spelling ability. They're measuring what I actually learned. So we need to then show success. So if they're going to buy in and try this again, then we need to ensure that success is happening on the end of that.
That's wonderful. And so we only have a couple of minutes left. So just as we wrap up, I'm wondering if you might have, Dr. Cunningham, any words of wisdom that we might provide to our students right now, any of our students. What might you say if you had an audience of students right now who are struggling with learning disabilities?
I'd say, by definition, you're smart people. You can't have a learning disability in Ontario if you don't have at least average above average talent. So right from the beginning, to get an LD, you're a smart person. We have other labels if you don't meet that criteria. So if you have a learning disability, you're a smart person. But what it means is, unfortunately, you got this silly weakness that's making it hard for you to do something that others are able to do. And though the term learning disability makes you sound like I'm disabled in learning, that's often what I think we think, is in fact, it's the very opposite. We're very smart individuals. We are able to learn. Hey, I learned how to drive a car, ride a bike. Kids learn lots of things every single day. You are learners. You're able to learn. But really what it means is when it comes to school, when it comes to that reading, that writing, and math, you're going to have to do it differently than the others are doing it. And when we're okay with the fact that we're going to do it differently, then that's when we can begin to really exploit those other strengths that you have and start to work collaboratively with your team, those teachers, your parents, and even friends to be able to find that solution and support you along the way. We know that students who are successful adults who have learning disabilities, they understand what their profile is. They're willing to advocate for the accommodations in their lives. They have a goal that they're working towards. When they run into barriers, they are flexible to work around those. And they do that because they have a support network there to help them out. And when you put those things together, there's nothing that states that you cannot achieve what your goals are.
That's so helpful. Thank you. Very inspiring, Dr. Cunningham. So I'd like to thank you on behalf of the Lakehead District School Board SEAC. I'd like to say thank you so much for taking the time to spend time with us and with our parents that are online that have taken this time on a chilly Wednesday evening. We hope that we'll be able to bring you up in person at some point, but for now, perhaps we can reach out for another session online.
Happy to do that. Have a wonderful evening, everyone.
Thanks so much.